Good morning, everyone, and welcome into Rounding the Bases presented by Enterprise Bank and Trust. Hashtag no stopping you. I am Joel Goldberg coming to you from the KCAV studios, Kansas City Audio Visual. If you have audio visual needs, you can check them out at kcav.com, or I'm happy to make the connection. Here we are, Monday morning in late September, and the baseball season is over, at least the regular season and my season. So it is full steam ahead on everything else. Somehow, some way, we got a 60-game baseball schedule in, so really excited about that. And a couple of other things before we get going. First and foremost, I've been mentioning this. I'm going to continue to mention it. The podcast schedule, by the way, is going to change a bit, and I'll have some details on that in the next coming days. Podcast is not going away, though. I can't do that. Big Brothers, Big Sisters. Got the fundraiser going on right now. If you are interested, and I'll pop this up later on throughout the course of the show, too. You can make a donation to the Most Wanted campaign, JGold, to 44321. You just have to text JGold to 44321. I'm going to pick up some steam here and get going with that. But at this point, I've got to bring in my panel, all returning guests, all for a third time, actually second time, I think, for Dr. Cass Butler. But it is good to join everyone. Good morning. Let's go around the horn, and we've got more topics to talk about today for the third straight month, and it is dawning on me right now that I don't have any of your names up there, which is as simple as that. There we go. See, I can push a button to make it all happen. I didn't need the names to know all my friends, but Nicole, Jacob, Silvey, André Davis, Chandra Clark, Cass Butler. That's the simple introduction. Let's go a little bit more complicated and start with, boy, André, all these choices here. You know it's not going to be you going first. So
it doesn't need to be.
I know it doesn't need to be, and it's not going to be. Nicole, we'll start with you.
Sure. Good morning, Joel. Thank you for having us back. And I don't know, you're the busiest man in Kansas City. I don't know how you could have such a busy weekend and start this at 9 o'clock. So thank you for having us. I am the president and founder of Connection Coach KC. I help people build their networks intentionally, and I also help boards with the recruitment and retention of members from communities of color. So thank you for having us.
It's good to have you all. Let's go down to Cass Butler. Cass, good morning.
Good morning, Joel. Thank you again for having us. I am Cass Butler, and I am an operations and marketing executive in higher education, and I help in the community with workforce development. Thanks again.
Chandra, you know you're up next.
Good morning, Joel and everyone. I'm so excited to be here. My name is Chandra Clark, and I am the new executive director of the VHL Alliance. It is a nonprofit organization fighting rare disease for the genetic cancer von Hippel-Ledoux.
And by the way, congratulations. We sort of knew that. No, we didn't know that last time. We knew that when we met a couple of weeks ago that you were moving on. So congratulations. And the beauty of all of that is that we can have Chandra back anytime we want, because that is the way this Zoom world works. André, last but not least, because why do we have you last? Because of your royal buffness. Go on.
Yeah, the royal buffness, and I'm the sweep up cleaner, right? So if you're thinking baseball, I'm the one that's gonna knock everybody home. So that's why I go last. But no, good to be with you guys again. This is, I think, the fourth time I've been on your show. So the question behooves itself to say, am I wearing up my welcome? I'm kind of like the guest that won't leave your house when you're trying to clean up. But no, I am thrilled, man, to be back. And so all of my experience has been for the last 20 plus years, really hovering around the corporate engagement world. And all that means is helping CEOs solve problems that exist in the business. And then when it's necessary, bringing business together so that they can do business. And so have done that both in the nonprofit and the for-profit world. And I would also say to Chandra, obviously bittersweet that she's leaving the city, but super excited for her and her new journey. So we'll hear more about that. And then also I would say too, Joe, what you're doing is what we're going to talk about today. Many of us are trying to figure out ways to kind of use our access, our influence, our privilege. You acknowledged early on after George Floyd that you wanted to do something. So I'm so proud of you, man, because like Nicole said, you are. If James Brown was around, he would say, how do you get it all done? And he was the busiest man, right? So you are doing the things that I think we're going to talk about. And I'm just proud of you and proud to know you. And thank you for using your platform to really help people better understand what to do in the moment that we all find ourselves in.
Well, thank you. And, you know, André is a big driver behind that, because I pick up the phone and I call my good friend André Davis and say, what can we do? What more can we do? And Nicole's always so nice about this. The busiest guy thing is like we're all busy. Mine just happens to be seen by a lot of people. So, you know, I'm not working any harder than anybody else. Everybody on this panel is working equally hard. Mine just happens to be a little bit more visible at times. The fifth Beatle, Kiana, says the gang is back, and you know, I named her the fifth Beatle, right? And she said, I swear this panel is going to go viral. And then I'm too old to fully understand what that means, but I get it. Kiana's my little sister. You want to talk about someone that's got a lot of exposure all over town? You see her pretty much popping up on news stations left and right. So I'm proud of her too. Okay, so just to backtrack a little bit, and then I want to stop talking and let everybody else get a word in for once. But we started this a couple of months ago. André and I had started it and said, hey, we need to have some discussions here. And so we began with a panel with André and Nicole and Chandra, just talking about, for me, it was a matter of saying, look, let's not just assume because someone's successful, like all of you, that means that you're immune from racism. And this isn't just a simple, you know, you have money, you don't. You are successful, you're not. It exists with everyone. So we did that. Then we added Cass to the mix. And last month we talked, I believe, about allies, right? And allyship. And so now let me go around the horn real quick before we hit our discussion, because I almost think this is a bit of a temperature check, and I don't mean that in a way that scares everybody at this point. I was getting those temperature checks every day going into the stadium. They're fine, but just where we're at right now. And Nicole, I'll start again with you. I mean, we continue to see issues, moments, controversies, unrest. Seems like some days it could go away, then it restarts again. A lot of it has to do with the way this news cycle works too. It's one of the reasons why I had said to André after our initial talk that none of the social unrest or the injustices and equality are going to go away in 2 months. We have to keep having these discussions even when the news cycle moves elsewhere. So that was really why I wanted to be able to do this. But let's talk, and I've asked you guys this question before. Nicole, where are we at now, late in September 2020?
Thank you. That was so well said. Nuanced at best. I think about, and I think I've shared this before, often people of color, especially Black people, are in a state of mourning. And just like grief comes in waves, as we've all experienced grief, that's exactly how it feels day to day. I'm prepared to hear on the news that something else has happened that shows that there's injustice still in this world. Day to day, though, I try to rally. I talk to people like the friends that are on this panel about the situation, stay hopeful and optimistic, and I say foot on the gas in terms of my work in diversity, equity, inclusion, and just my work in being a citizen. It's hard, it's tough, and there's a sense of we're all in this together, but also, is there going to be light at the end of the tunnel? What are we going to do to continue this anti-racism work in very intentional ways? Because fatigue is real. And especially for people of color, the constant blows that it can feel like that can come our way in terms of injustice, and with videos being so powerful and such a strong visual, those triggers, it's just an ongoing process. So I am coping, I guess, like so many, but remain optimistic and resolute in the work that I'm doing to move forward and progress with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And certainly don't have all the solutions, but willing to be a part of the movement.
Chandra, how about you?
I really feel like there is a sense of hope, and yet at the same time, a sense of hopelessness. As we near election time, there's a heartfelt concern for people who don't have a voice and don't have access to resources. And then you have people like Nicole and Cass and André who have the platform and the opportunity to use their voice, and they're doing so. So I think it's a sense of sadness, in a sense, because we're in a time of uncertainty. We know that things are going to escalate within the next couple of months, and there is a lot of tension. And at the same time, voices are being heard now more than ever before. And so that is creating an elevated sense of awareness, which is also bringing joy. So it's almost bittersweet.
All right, Cass, how about you?
I think that Chandra and Nicole both said it so well. I feel like I attend a funeral and I mourn and I start healing a little bit and I'm attending another funeral. And I feel like it's very cyclical, but I'm also still hopeful. I think that all of us are doing a great job. I like the way Chandra said using our voices, to really try and break through the noise, the nonsense, and share smart resources to help our community, our nation heal, because all of us have a platform that's greater than Kansas City. And so I think that we're doing the best that we can to share outside of Kansas City, those powerful ways that we can help our community take 3 steps forward every time we're pushed a step back. And that's what we have to keep doing. I feel like we cannot get weary in well doing. We just have to recharge and get up to get through another day.
I love that too. I mean, it seems like there are always steps back. And I keep trying to remind myself that those steps back don't have to be complete backwards, right? Almost opportunity then to take more steps forward. André, you're batting cleanup on this one again.
Yeah. So mirror a lot of that. I would say let's remain hopeful. But here's the scenario. We've heard this story before, where a father walks into an airport and he's got 3 kids and they're just bouncing all over the place. And there's a gentleman sitting down and he's like, "Why aren't you controlling your kids?" And I'm condensing this story, but there's a bigger story. So he says, "Why aren't you controlling your kids?" He said, "We just buried her mother. We just buried their mother, and I don't know what to tell them." And that's why they're reacting. So we are still focused on the what, but we haven't asked why. So if you take that scenario and you look at the kids that are in that airport, you should be asking, God, why are they doing that? Tell me about that. Like, what's happened, right? We don't do that. We're too quick to judge. And so in this moment of judgment, that's what's happening around the country. And so, we see the rioting consistently, and for some obvious reasons, we see a little bit of that. And we're too focused on the what. We need to ask why. Why is this still happening? And do we have the appropriate leadership across the country, in our communities, to be able to mitigate what's going on in this country? And so I am hopeful for this reason. People like you, there are some young people, they're not black and brown, they're white, and they're speaking out. And so that keeps me hopeful. And this is not going to stop. What we're seeing across the country, even in Kansas City, is not going to slow down. So we just have to say, okay, this is what it's going to be. How do we help the cause? Or are we going to gaslight the cause, right? And so we got to be real clear about that, because we're really facing, and I'm with all of you about the election. That's going to happen regardless. But then what's the aftermath? How do we get back to our normalcy? And so for those I think that are tuning in, just understand we all have a role, and that's what we want to talk about is, what is your role? When you go home and you sit at your dinner, are you just using your remote of life and tuning out, changing the channel, turning the TV off? Or are you keeping the TV on because you want to do something? And so that's, I think, what I'd like to have us talk about through this time that we're gathering, more short time, is how do we do something about it and know that it all affects us, right? You're not immune from it. And it's going to hit people near to you, right? The little girl that got killed earlier this year, was that last year? I don't even remember. A little blonde lady from Leawood was killed in the Crossroads at a food truck. She didn't live in the Crossroads, lived in Johnson County. So we understand that this can blow up and affect people where we think we're sheltered. I would tell you that you're not.
It does affect everyone. And, unfortunately, I think a lot of people would rather ignore it under the assumption it doesn't affect them, which I would say first and foremost, just because it doesn't affect you doesn't mean you can't make a difference. If you care about community and you care about your city, you care about people, just humanity. I mean,
Right.
it's as simple as that, just caring about humanity. So let's talk about this us versus them mentality. And it's one that I understand, but I don't. And what I mean by that is that if you really think this through, it makes no sense to be us versus them. Like, why wouldn't you care about people? But I think that there's a lot of gray area here. And here's what I mean by it. The five of us could sit on here and represent saying, hey, this is the way it should be. And we care about people. And then you can have the far other side that says, I don't like people of color. Hey, let me fly this Confederate flag and this is who I am. Okay. And I don't know that we're changing them anytime soon. It'd be great if we could. It might take a couple generations. This is just my opinion. But it's everyone in the middle that may not even know that they could be part of the problem or part of the solution if they understood it better. Is that right? I mean, does that all make some sense? And so, I think that's where the gains have to happen in the middle for those people that need to be enabled to say, look, you can help and you can make a difference. So I want to ask this question. André, I'll go back to you first on this one. The us versus them mentality. Why is that happening? Because I think sometimes that us versus them ends up being looked at as the far extremes. And and it's not just the far extremes.
No, it's not the far extremes. And so you're right. It comes back to the empathy piece and it comes back to the humanity piece, right? And so it's a segregation of thought, if you will, right? So they're rioting. That has nothing to do with us. If they just work hard, or if they just go do the things and get educated and all that and not realizing there are systematic things that happen that prevent people, like Chandra, who said, who don't have access, who don't have a voice, who don't have a platform, from prevailing. And so if there's a system in place, and it's like if you're in baseball and your life starts out on third base and my life starts in the dugout, how is that fair? It isn't fair. But that's what happens. So we judge it because your life started on third base. My life started in the dugout. I'm just trying to get the bat. And you're wondering, how come you're not on third base? And you don't understand all the mountains that I have to climb because how you started in life. And so we're not even willing as human beings sometimes, and people, not everyone, we're not even willing sometimes to step back. And in terms, what we do is we start defending our position. Well, I've worked hard. How come they can't work hard? And we can't say that. We shouldn't say that. We should step back and go, why is a community like that not progressing? Why is there so much crime in those communities? Why are so many kids uneducated? Why are so many kids without a father or a mother that care about them? But we judge that. And so to me, that mentality is why we have, partially why we have some of the mess that we have in this country and in this city, because we can drive by the mess. Because we go back to what we think is the beautiful landscape, houses, all the stuff. We can drive right through the inner city and go, yep, that's just something else. I don't know. I wouldn't want to live over there. And then we go home and it's a different environment and you're detached. And so how do we get you undetached to care enough, right? Because our kids are interacting with a lot of different people, right? From a lot of different backgrounds. And at some point, they're going to be in your house at some point. They're going to be maybe dating your daughter at some point. So there's a lot of things where we intersect each other. How do we have a better understanding so we look at people as human beings first? And how do I help human beings? And we just don't do that today. Not all of us. There's a lot of us that do.
Yeah.
Some of us just don't care. You're right, Joe. You can't stop the Confederate flag, folks. They are what they are. But the people that, they don't mean it. They have biases, right? They don't even understand that they're being a little bit prejudiced. They have racism in their bones, and they mean well. They just don't understand, so they're ignorant. So how do you get out of that sort of that box and go, okay, this is a real problem? And I think that's why that us versus them mentality exists, because we can drive by it and we don't have to worry about it.
And I think that most of the people we're talking about in what I described as the gray area completely frown upon and are disgusted by the Confederate flag waving, open racist. But that's usually like that's that's where they put their flag and claim see, I'm not a racist. See, I hate those people, and it's
Yeah.
not enough. It's not understanding it at a deeper level. And so, Cass, I wanted to ask you about this because I think so much to me, so much can just go wrong in the wording and the way we describe this. So I've come to understand what white privilege means, but what I'll often hear from people is, well, I'm white and I actually grew up in a poor household. And so, like to Andre's point, well, I didn't start on third base either. And so I think we need to do a better job sometimes of understanding that white privilege, or starting on third base versus first base, or higher on the mountain versus lower on the mountain, isn't a matter of who has money or doesn't have money. That's not the discussion. It can be a part of it, right? But when we're talking about white privilege, those that do, those that don't, it's not just as simple as money, is it?
Oh, absolutely. It's not as simple as money. And Joel, this is a great example. So, Nicole and André and Chandra and I, we can talk about our experiences being professionals, dealing with the issues we face, working in predominantly white organizations for most of our lives, to our white peers, to people like you, to people who don't experience it. And they can go, oh, I didn't realize that, or I didn't recognize that, or I would have never guessed. And they can walk away, right? But we have to face that again and again and again. And that's privilege. It's not just about money. It's about treatment. It's about skin that we can't take off, that we love. We're very proud to have it, but we lose something because of that. So it's those tiny nuances. I believe André said the word nuances. It's those tiny nuances. Is that my wonderful technology that's making all that noise?
I think you're okay.
I think you're good.
Okay, thank you. It's those tiny nuances that it's not about have and have not, unless it has to do with, I want to say this carefully because you're right, I can say the wrong words and people will not receive the message. And so I want to make sure that the message is received. Really simply, it's about, we live the experience as minorities, as African or Black people, a day in and day out. And white people can talk about them with us. And that's the difference. Very succinctly, that's the difference.
And so I think that gets back, Nicole, to walking in someone else's shoes and understanding them better and understanding. And by the way, this is not a black-white thing either. I mean, it certainly comes into play here. I would say in anything in life, walk in someone else's shoes. Here's like the simplest example and how I believe it can apply to anything you do. Take it from a baseball standpoint. I'm getting ready to do an interview and the guy doesn't show up at the last minute. And he thinks, whatever, I'll get him the next time. But is he thinking about the effort that we have to put in to do a show and how we've got that time slotted out and we now suddenly have to figure it out? You know what I mean? Or let me put the shoe on the other foot. He's running late. Oh, my reaction might be, oh, there we go. Typical athlete's not showing up on time because he's doesn't think this is a big deal. Who's to say he's not on the training table? Who's to say that something's not going wrong behind the scenes? Who's to say there isn't something going on? So I think no matter what we do in life, when you try to be empathetic and walk in someone else's shoes, you're at least going to answer, as André said before, what that why is. So let's talk about that a little bit more, Nicole, and how empathy and walking in others' shoes, and I'm talking about within your networks. All of you are living in a professional world where oftentimes, not always, oftentimes you walk into a room and you are the only person of color. Right. So, Nicole, let's talk more about that and how others in that room can walk in your shoes.
Thank you, Joel. When I think of empathy, I think empathy is the foundation for everything that we're speaking about. What empathy does is, we know, walk in someone else's shoes, listen, think about their experiences. And often I have well-intended people who may hear me share a story about something that occurred to me and they want to dismiss it or discount it. Oh, it wasn't that. He didn't mean that, or he was just ignorant, or putting a context on the situation instead of trusting that as a person of color, what I'm sharing is accurate and was my lived experience. Another thing that I think happens unintentionally is that people think that they're validating you, but really, thinking they're giving you a compliment, like, oh, surely they wouldn't say that to you because, and then they list the demographics of which you represent. They wouldn't do that to you as a Black professional. They wouldn't do that because you live in this area, not realizing that racism exists in every crevice, nook, and cranny in our community and shows up multiple ways. And a business suit, a degree, a zip code isn't going to make us immune to that. I think that's what people miss. Or derogatory statements that people don't even realize they say, like, oh, well, that's the race card. Race card is akin to saying color blindness and all of those trigger words. There is no race card. And when people say pulling a race card, racism, as I said, exists everywhere. So it isn't pulling a card, it's just there. And so what we're doing is calling it to the forefront. And just like the other panelists that are here today, my dear friend Chandra and Cass and André, I know that when we have a situation, we try to think that it could be anything but racism first. We give every benefit of the doubt, and then we know what it looks like, what it feels like. And so when I'm sharing a story, the empathy that means so much to me is when someone says, I never thought of it that way. I can only imagine. I've not been in your shoes, but they're trying to think about what that would feel like. When we do that, and vice versa, when people of color do that for white people, when I've had a white friend say, I didn't grow up from a privileged background in terms of finances, and tries to share their story about struggling, a story that's very different than my upbringing, I also have to show empathy and listen. Mm-hmm. And that's where we can have some shared understanding. What I have found is, since we still largely live in segregated communities, we often don't get to have the dialogue like all of us have had as friends. When we get to know people and know their stories, it breaks down those barriers in very intentional ways.
Mm-hmm. Right. That's what drinks are supposed to be for, by the way, too. By the way, a belated happy birthday to Nicole.
Oh, thank you.
Happy birthday.
That was so kind of you. And Joel texted me or emailed me like after a game one night to say that if that isn't such a kind gesture, I really appreciate it. That made my day. Thank you.
Well, I know it was, we all had talked about celebrating it at some point, so that still needs to happen. And I'm more available as of today, so that's good. That was we didn't forget, by the way. None of us forgot to wish Nicole a happy birthday. That was the public acknowledgement here on this podcast for everybody that is watching. All right, back on track. Chandra, I want to talk more about empathy, because I do think that it goes both ways to me in this standpoint. We're not going to learn more about each other unless we're curious and unless we're asking why, unless we're trying to walk in their shoes. So I think Nicole hit on something really important there. The more we can build trust within each other and educate each other, the more we're comfortable with each other having these discussions. So let's talk about that, and for you, how important empathy is.
Joel, you know what's interesting when you talk about empathy? One of the things that I've recently realized is it's really about how you show up. And I think it's important that we also set our expectations of how people show up, and really understanding that how we show up is not the same way that someone else will show up. And so I say that to say I'm a very empathetic person. I'm all about feelings. I'm a person who walks into the room. I can feel the energy. I can look at body language. And so the way that I love and affirm others is different from someone per se like André. André is a male figure, had a very pivotal role in my life, both personally and professionally, where he really coached me through a lot of areas, especially where I was struggling with confidence. And so his way of showing up for me was his love language, in a sense, like holding me accountable and, being empathetic, understanding where I was, but also holding me accountable and calling me to action and moving forward. And so I share that to say, we all play a different role. We all have a different part of the puzzle. So how Cass shows up for me is different than how Nicole shows up for me, but they're all showing up for me in different ways. And I think it's important to understand that when we're talking about us versus them, and being empathetic and walking in someone else's shoes, we also have to set our expectation that we can't expect someone who really doesn't understand where we're coming from and what we've been through to really be able to walk that out. Now, for example, we have someone like you who you will never be able to understand what it's like to walk in our shoes per se. However, you feel that calling in your heart that you know that you need to use your platform and your voice to support the work that needs to be done. And so I share all of this to say, I think that it also takes us back to a place in this time of patience and yet forgiveness, because we're all in this time of working through progress. And so there's a celebration for the progress that is made, but there's an understanding that there is a lot of progress that needs to be made. And as you're walking through such a sensitive issue, there has to be a constant place of reflection, patience, and forgiveness, which leads us back to empathy and understanding.
Yeah, I love that perspective, Chandra. And I would almost look at it. I'll give you my perspective just from a personal standpoint, and I'll try to steer it back away, because this really does not need to be a, hey, look at what Joel's doing. There are a lot of people that are a lot more active than me. It's not about that, but I think that we all play a certain role here. And for me, I feel like the more I'm able to have these conversations, the more knowledgeable I become. And now I can have those conversations privately with any one of you. And I sometimes do have those conversations with André. And that's fine. That helps inform me to get to do this panel. But the greater good to me is that if there are people that are watching this that learn from it, that's how we start taking those strides. And so, yes, you use your voice, you use your platform. But I also think, this is just my thought, that if people that look like me, that may say, hey, wait a minute, I relate more to him, whether that's right or wrong, and then they can learn, hey, wait a minute, okay, I understand that. And now that opens up more doors. But the flip side of that is, if others of color that may look more like you see me doing this and they have a better feel and a trust for me, maybe they're more willing to have those conversations with me. I mean, this is a trust discussion, because when we build that trust, the five of us here have more trust today as a group than we did a couple of months ago, which means that we're more comfortable having these discussions, which means other people are more comfortable having these discussions. And I think, and Cass, I'll throw this question at you. How important is it to make a very uncomfortable topic more comfortable? And maybe comfortable is not even the right word, or at least putting us in a position that we're willing to have uncomfortable discussions. Because look, most of our friends, myself included, for many years, just thought it's a lot easier just not to do this. It's a lot easier to not have this because it can be painful, right? And it can be argumentative at times. How important are these uncomfortable conversations, Cass?
These critical conversations are very important, Joel. And, that's why we're here today. We have all gotten very comfortable speaking amongst ourselves, speaking amongst groups that we're very comfortable speaking with, and not those people who could benefit maybe most from these types of conversations. And so, like Nicole likes to say, all gas. I love to say all gas, no brakes. I think it's just time to continue having these conversations, being respectful, civil discourse. And I think that with the groups that we all associate with, we can do that. We know how to pull ourselves out of situations where it's not healthy. But I think that we have to continue dialoguing. We have to, and it's okay. I don't want to disrespect or discount speaking to people or aligning yourself with people that you've been comfortable with. It's what we've done. But I think it's time now to stretch ourselves a bit more and see who else we can invite to the conversation. Okay, we've done that. Let's invite one more person. Who else could benefit from this conversation or this topic with us? And just keep expanding that circle so that more and more can benefit from the knowledge. And I think as we're having those conversations, that we should all come from a place of ignorance, right? A place of none of us know much about the topic. And let's just start asking ourselves why a lot so that we can have thoughtful conversation and really build a strong base of knowledge from that point. That's how I see it. I can't hear you, Joel.
That was me. That was every now and then
Okay.
it happens. I saw all you guys were muting yourselves. I'm like, you know what? I'll do it too because I keep hearing a little bit of noise, and I actually don't. We always blame this on poor Chandra, and I 100% it's not. Yeah, I can't find it actually anywhere. I thought maybe it's me, but it's not. It's okay. It's not bad. And Chandra sounds great today, by the way, so it's all good.
She does.
And she's gonna smile one way or another because that's what she does, and
Right.
So we love that. But Cass, what you were talking about the why. I mean, finding that why applies to anything we do in life. I was talking with a Royals instructor about that yesterday, Rusty Kuntz, who's like a legendary coach of fundamentals, and he said, I try to wake up every day and figure out, why are we doing this? Is there a way to do it better? Why are we doing this drill, or why aren't we doing this? And when you can have a perspective of why, that is going to enable you to walk in someone else's shoes at a higher level, I think. And then this thing all keeps multiplying and keep learning. And by the way, for everybody out there that says, hey, I just want to learn something new every day. Hey, I just want to get a little better every single day. Well, this category would fall right in there. How can we get better at treating members of our community, and how can we get better in eliminating systemic racism? André, we talked a little bit about whataboutisms. Let's continue or further that discussion, and what about isms and why they aren't helpful.
Yeah, let me say this too, because for the people that are listening to, I know we're everything that everyone's saying is so important. I don't want you to think that this show is about casting blame, feel guilty. You should be a little uncomfortable if you feel a certain way, right? And you acknowledge how you feel about a certain thing, because we all have biases, right? So we should be okay with that. We also don't represent every brown and black person in the country. These are 4 perspectives, lived experiences from perspectives, right? So I would encourage you not to judge and go, well, hey, I saw 4 people that were successful or professional, and they seem to have it all together. Here's a point, and I'll get to what you asked me, Joel. 2 months ago, a guy I went to high school with, 35 years ago, was it longer than that? That was 40 years ago, 40 plus years ago, which is unbelievable to even think about. Really unbelievable to think about. He says, we went to school together. There was no racism. And I said, oh, I guess you didn't realize every Wednesday I was called the N-word walking home from, an event. Every Wednesday I was called the N-word. He goes, and he said, you were? I said, of course. So you look at Nicole, you look at Chandra, you look at Cass, and you go, they probably never experienced racism. And that to me is the challenge with how we segregate people that look like we look, that dress the way we dress, and go, oh, but you're so successful. You couldn't have never had racism. There is a story to everyone on this panel, including Joel. And so we can't do that. We have to understand that although we may have progressed beyond where we started, we're still progressing. It's just at a different level. So that's not what you asked me, but I wanted to add that because I know people looking in, you can look at this and go, well, some people say, well, black people are just complaining all the time. You've got it pretty good today. This is not a complaint. We're not complaining. We're allowing you to kind of acknowledge how we have lived in our professional lives and what we do day to day. And this is, we're letting you into a discussion. And I want you to take it for that and not judge us on what we do now, judge us where we started. And so I wanted to say that. What was your question? Tell me again, what was your question? Because I forgot already.
No, it's okay. What aboutism?
Yeah. So, when we talk about that, it's so easy to go, but what about Chandra? She just took an executive role, and I kind of touched on that a little bit in my rant a little bit about talking about this. So we look at figures that success, brown and black, and go, well, wait a minute. I have a black friend I've known. When you say I have a black friend and you can count them, you don't have enough damn black friends. You shouldn't be able to count them, is what I would tell you. I never say, oh, but I have a white friend. I have a ton of friends, and they run every color of the spectrum, right? So I don't look at it that way. So to me, please stop saying that. Or I grew up with someone, he was a black doctor. He just, he was smart, because what then you're suggesting is other people who haven't become doctors aren't smart. So those biases, I wouldn't say they're malicious, but they're ignorant. And what I would tell you is pull that out. You have to acknowledge you're doing that. Sometimes you don't. That's why these conversations to me are so important, and why we like to have these conversations. And please know, we're also happy to have these discussions with people, because we want you to understand things that you're seeing on TV, something happened. That's why you see the reaction. So when you start talking about all these things and you go, oh, but what about this? And then, but this guy did, you got to stop saying that, because Black people that in this country never say that. We don't ever say that. We're not using that. And so those would be some of the feedback. And I want people just to understand, this is just we're just opening the hood a little bit to how we navigate. And again, most of us are in board meetings, we're in leadership circles, and it doesn't look like what you're seeing on screen. And I want you to consider for a moment, when's the last time you stepped into a room and everyone in that room was of color? And if you did, how did you feel in that moment?
Putting the shoe on the other foot. That's what that is. And I would actually love for everyone to experience that, and and then almost experience it in a way where you're very aware of it, where you're almost taking notes and observing, and then saying, okay, maybe this is what it feels like, and understanding that. But a few quick comments that have come in that I didn't get to yet. Linda Endicott, great way to begin the week. So we always love hearing from Linda. Mike Meyer, what a group, couple of rock stars there. You know who he's talking about, because Mike Meyer, Band of Angels. Personal thank you to Nicole and Chandra for taking time to meet with me and continue to make me better. Would love to connect with Cass and André and continue the conversation and keep getting better. So I'll make those intros, because Mike is someone that you all should know. And Nicole and Chandra, you know that already. He is someone that makes an impact and has the strongest of empathy genes and curiosity and knowledge of wanting to learn. So I want to throw that out there. Chandra, let me get back to you here on this one. And let's just continue a little bit more of what André was talking about in terms of whataboutism and your thoughts on that. Because it's funny. That's not funny, but once André pointed out to me how often you will hear, well, but what about the looting? Oh, but what about, and now I notice it, and it's, for lack of a better term, it's nails on a chalkboard, which is good, because it means that now every time I see it, I'm like, no, wait, no, that's not what we're talking about.
Yep.
So, Chandra, I want you to talk about that a little bit and how we combat it.
Well, I love what André said about this idea is that we look at people and we have a certain perception. And so I think I just want to, again, go back to understanding how people perceive things related to how they show up. So we can't expect someone who doesn't want to see things differently to not engage that way. It really takes someone wanting to desire to step out of their comfort zone and their lived experiences to experience someone else's experiences. And so that's a degree of empathy that I feel like I say this every show, that takes a lot of self-reflection. So for example, there are times that I would call André and I just, all of us know going through a period of growth and transition can be icky and very uncomfortable. And I would call him, I would cry, I would talk about it, and he would really bring me back to the core of who I am, reaffirming my purpose. But also we would talk a lot about, there are people who look at you and don't understand your struggles. There are people that look at you and don't understand your childhood trauma. They don't understand why you struggle with your confidence. They don't look at you the way that you look at yourself. And so that again goes back to, we look on the outside looking in, right? And we assume, we look at Cass, she's Dr. Butler, she's got it made. but we haven't had a chance to really sit down with her and understand that she went through hell to get there. Or we look at Nicole Silvey, and she's killing it in her game. She's everywhere.
Right.
She's this, but we don't know the tears that she's cried. We don't know the hardships that she's endured. Or André, your royal buffness. We look at him everywhere. He's done amazing things, but we don't know that he didn't always have that. He didn't start in that place. But again, the core of all this is that it takes you being able to sit down and move out of your own comfort zone and your perception and your mindset and want to hear someone's story and want to understand the why, so that you don't engage in the, well, what about this or what about that? We all know that there's always a reason. There's always a reason why someone does what they do, right?
Yeah.
But we also have a responsibility, and we have to be able to be open to understanding the why. And I'll, close this out. I think it's important for us as we talk about call to action and moving forward. We can't really spend a lot of time on the people who don't want to understand the why. We can't really spend a lot of time on the people who have the Confederate flags and don't want to change their self-perception. We really have to focus on those people who desire to be change agents and really want to use their voice and roll up their sleeves and be a part of the whole process.
Yeah. Well,
Nicole, I see you shaking your head. Actually, everybody is, but I'll let you, do you want to jump in on that, please do.
Sure. There's so many good thoughts that have been said, and I'm still on something that André said, is that we're not complaining. And the first thing that came to my mind is we're not complaining, we're advocating. And I've talked to, I think, all of my friends here about, we were socialized at a time where, as Black people, if things happened in the workplace, in our community, we just stuffed it down and then shared those stories amongst our shared community, our shared culture. We didn't tell white folks and white friends what happened. So having this opportunity to speak about these issues openly may seem like a no-brainer, but it's not the way we've operated in the past. At least I was raised to be grateful that you have access to that wonderful college, or you have that good job, and you just put one foot in front of the other. And we often push those sometimes microaggressions and a lot more macroaggressions down, and just lived with this racism that has been pretty pervasive our whole lives. So that's why when we show up now and speak about it, people say, that happened? What? I didn't know. And it's because we didn't share it openly because it didn't feel safe to do so. Or we also oftentimes didn't think we'd be believed or that it would make a difference. So having this opportunity to bring up some of these not somewhat uncomfortable, very uncomfortable topics, it's real talk, and real talk can be messy. But when we're able to share these stories, that's where we have a shared understanding. I agree with Chandra. There's some people who are committed to not understanding. Every time someone says all lives matter, I really often question whether that is just a distraction or if they really misunderstand what we mean by Black Lives Matter. I don't even describe or explain what that term means anymore, what the movement is. I just say, are you anti-racist or not? Because that's really what we're talking about, and getting caught up in semantics, the distraction.
Right.
And so that's what my focus has been. And I think so much of when we're talking, it seems shocking to some people. And dear friends of mine said, you never told me that. And I didn't. And there's a sense of protecting white people in the past, which sounds odd, but we've fallen into protecting oppressors or protecting those in majority culture because we don't want our friends to feel discomfort. So we are now saying, we're not complaining, we're advocating, and we're bringing awareness to topics that are not new and ones we want to share with the world so that change can happen.
Cass, jump on in, please.
I could relate to everything Nicole and Chandra was saying, but Nicole in particular, I was just thinking, I grew up with a mom who was much older, and she was one generation removed from slavery. And so I was very much Southern Mother at that. So I was, taught to always show gratitude, never challenge, be uncomfortable in order to make white people comfortable, right? And that was just the way I was raised. Always, no matter what's being said, no matter what's going on, never say anything back and just respect it. And life will be easier for me. Mm-hmm. And guess what? It wasn't. It was painful. And as Chandra alluded to, there's a lot of traumas associated with that. And so I could completely just relate to every single thing you said. And today, you know, we still find, not anymore, you know, to a lesser extent, but we still found ourselves wanting to make our peers, our friends comfortable because they didn't do it. It's just the way we were socialized, right? And so it is important that we have these uncomfortable conversations because they need to understand our perspective and where we are coming from and why it's very important to us now to see change for our children. And Joel, if I had to, André, you said something about that remote control existence. And I kind of associate that with cognitive dissonance. We gotta get away from that. That's call to action. It's done. Stop. We have to stop, be in the moment, and think, and be in the game or get out of the game.
Right. I love it.
Associated with baseball, but that time of cognitive dissonance. For those who care, no more lukewarm. If you're lukewarm, you got to choose. You got to choose, and it's not a competition. You know, equality is not a competition. It's no one should win, no one should lose. You know, I feel strongly about that. It's not zero sum, but there's no more time to be lukewarm about this.
I want to follow up on that, and I don't know. I know Nicole and André are parents. Cass and Chandra, I'm not sure. Cass, yes. Chandra, okay. Everybody. So we're all parents. So I say it for this reason. Who doesn't want the best for their kids? I mean, everybody can relate to that. We all want to provide for our kids the way either our parents did for us or provide for what we didn't have or whatever it is. And so my follow-up, and let me ask everybody this, but Cass, you brought it up, and you talked about your mother and the way that you were raised. And all of you were shaking your heads about, hey, don't stir things up, just be grateful and all of that. Is the upcoming generation, Cass, your kids, do they have a different perspective than you did?
Most definitely. But I was very intentional. Once I knew a little better, and, I've fought a lot of miseducation, if you will. And so it was just very important for me that she knew better and that she knew that she belonged here and that she had a right to everything as well. And so it was just very important for me that she knew to challenge what didn't look right respectfully, to work hard, but don't be pushed over and those sorts of things. So, and also to embrace all people. She is, she's been taught that she's not better than anyone and no one is better than her. And that's been very fundamental from the start. And we talk about those things when she sees those things. She once said to me, it's almost like we're treated like androids and they think they're iPhones. And I thought that was so funny. That's that generation. I said, well, let's talk about that. And so those are the conversations we have.
That's really interesting. Chandra, how about your perspective then on that in the next generation?
So, Joel, I want to make one quick point because your comment about as parents, we all want the best for our children. I love that, but that's not always true. I think that's why it goes back to perception. There are parents that really abuse their children intentionally. There are parents that mistreat their children. There are parents who are unkind. And it goes back to who they are. We assume that most parents want the best for their children because that is our heart and that is how we show up, but that is not how everyone shows up. So I think for me as a parent, I love to tell everyone I'm so proud of my daughter. She's 19. She's very much finding her independence, living her best life, which she perceives to be living her best life. And mom is supporting that. And so is her dad. But I taught, my daughter's name is Jada, from the time she was a child. I wanted her to know that she deserved the very best in her life. And even though she saw me go through hardship, she saw me go through a divorce at a young age, I made a point of taking her to cultural activities. I would take her to different restaurants in different parts of town. I would take her on experiences because I didn't want her to ever perceive that the things that she saw me go through or maybe family dynamics I didn't want it to affect her confidence in how she saw the world. So I share all of this to say that, again, I think it's about, as we look to the new generation, it's important for us, like Nicole said, that are advocates, that we're supporting and that we're advocating for change, and that we're also utilizing our platforms to make sure that we're supporting those who are on the front line, but also those who are behind the scenes. But I think it's so important to understand intention, and everyone doesn't have a pure intention. And it's okay for us to acknowledge and admit that.
Nicole, how about your thoughts?
That was really good, Chandra. I was thinking about, thank you for bringing up assumptions, because I do fall into that category, and I'm glad you brought that to light. And so I often assume that parents want to protect their children. And I know that was true for my parents. And so the lessons they taught me because they wanted, like Cass said, for us to have an easier life. And for most part, that has been helpful for me, but there are some trappings in that, right? So what I've done is, I think a lot of us of our generation, I've done my own self-work. So I've looked at, when you know better, you do better. So I looked at what's gotten me to where I am, and then I hope to pass on to my son, and I do with intentionality, that he owns every space that he shows up in, and he is in every good place he belongs. So teaching him to be more of an advocate, to be more outspoken, and advocate for himself, but also advocate for other people. That's a very different approach than we were raised. The be quiet, respectful, fall back. Of course, respect is always going to be a part of what we teach our children, but also to call out when there is injustice, to be much more of that vocal advocate. And so my son is only 8. So I think of my dear friend and sis, Kiana. She is really representative of Generation Z, and speaking in direct and still yet respectful ways, but saying good is not good enough. And I am so grateful for that. So I see change in the way that we are speaking, the ways that we are moving in our communities, and in the ways we're saying that we want better. And it starts with us. And so, and calling people on behavior and using privilege where we have it, and using our voices. I see that much more in the generations that have come behind us. And I know we've paved the way, and I'm looking forward to just following Gen Z and the generations behind them as they continue to lead the way, and we support them in the work that they're doing, because it's going to take an intergenerational approach to really make the efforts that we're talking about, and the generational change that you mentioned, Joel. So those Confederate flag wavers, that their great-grandchildren are not in the same place they are today.
Couldn't agree more. André, do you got a thought on this?
Yeah, just a couple really quick. So I would say if we had parents, to Chandra's point, which was a really good point, if you had more parents that really cared, some of the adults that we see behaving in the way that they behave probably wouldn't behave in that way. And I have a couple examples. One was an example where my daughter, I have 2 kids. I have one that's almost 21 and almost will be 4. So I have a little bit of gap, but beautiful thing. So my daughter, who was going to school at Lathe East, was a friend with a lady who was white, a girl, high school student that was transitioning and doing she was transitioning over into becoming a male. And she came home with she was concerned that people were talking about her. And I said, how do you feel about her? And she said, well, she's a friend of mine, and I don't care what they say, I'm still her friend. I said, that's it. I love that. There was another example where when she was younger, and I think I shared this on another show, where when she was with her mom at one point, there was a man that helped her mom out of the snow. And when she described that man, she used she said, this white man helped my mother. And I said, that's great. Why did you describe him as white? And the point of that is, we have to have parents that are willing to have those conversations. So if you have a kid come in and he says derogatory things, are you the parent that corrects that? Are you the parent that asks, where'd that come from? Why do you say that? They're just people like us. Why would you say something like that? The challenge we see today in the streets is we don't have parents that are doing that. So to Chandra's point, most of us want our kids to have, to care about people, have empathy, do all these other things. There is a segment, though, that pushes hate. And so when you ask about the generation, I feel awesome about Chandra's kids, Nicole's kids, Cass's daughter, right? Because I know they want to make a social impact. when we were growing up, it was like chase money, go have fun, do all your thing. We weren't involved in nonprofit work, didn't even know what that was. I know I didn't. And so we have kids now that care about their social impact. And if you look at it, they're the ones that are out front. Our young generation, folks like Kiana and all that, they're the ones that are out front making an impact, protesting peacefully and all that. So for me, I feel really, really good. And I want people to understand there are really good things happening in this country when you sort through the mess. The mere fact that we're having this dialogue is a really good thing. I can't tell you the number of people who have reached out to me and my colleagues on this show and said, what can I do? I support you. I see you. The partners in my firm, Russ, Brandon, Beth Ann, Brandon, when George Floyd got murdered, asked me how I was doing. And so you didn't typically see that in corporations. I've met with other organizations where their principals of the firm who are white are asking their Black leadership folks, how are you doing? What can we do? Can we talk about this thing that's going on and what can I do? So when we talk about all of this, it can seem gloomy. I want you to know it's not gloomy, right? There are some really good things happening in this country. We just have to quiet the noise of all the negativity and really focus on the people that are trying to be activists for all people, not just brown, Black people.
Great point. There's so much there from all of you. And so I want to just give everyone a chance. We've hit an hour, which you all know we could do 2 hours and still just be getting started. But
I can't believe this got done in an hour. That's just unbelievable to me.
Doesn't have to be done in an hour, but I know that all of you outside of me have things to do today, and then I don't know what I'm going to do today. I'm going to decompress a little bit, I think, and I won't fully do that. I got other stuff to do.
Yeah, you do.
It's not in my nature. But let's go around the horn one more time, wide open to wherever you want to go with it. But when you think back to this conversation over the last hour. And we've talked a lot about empathy and whataboutism and perspective. Now talked about generations. By the way, I am constantly reminded, and Chandra, thanks for bringing up that point, because unfortunately not everybody does want what's best for their kids. So that was a little bit of an assumption on my part, because how could you not want what's best for your kids? But that's a reminder that unfortunately not everybody is wired that way or has whatever issues that they have going on. Not an excuse or justification either. But I have hope in the fact that our kids' generation sees a lot of the things that were normalized in our generation and those before us as wrong. And so I see them more willing to speak out. I see them more comfortable in different settings than we oftentimes were in. And so I learn from my kids' generation, certainly learn from the Kianas. That gives me a lot of hope. I guess that's my final little spiel here, but let's go around the horn. Cass, I'll start with you, not because you got the doctor in front of your name, but because I haven't heard from you for a while. I like to throw in that every now and then too. But how about a final thought, Cass, wherever you want to go, just about this conversation?
Yeah, I think I just would reaffirm that assumptions and distractions, that we should probably avoid them. We've heard that, I think, from all of us, and it really is all love. We're not here to criticize. I think we really all want to educate and inform. Again, it's 4 or 5 individual perspectives. We don't represent the Brown community, and there are folks in the Brown community that don't represent us either. I want to say that just to be clear. Do your homework. That's all I've got, Joel. Well, thank you again. I appreciate you so much.
We're going to meet in person here at 1.2, but I don't think we can say that enough too. That we have 4 people of color on this podcast right now that do not represent the viewpoints of every Black person out there. You represent each of your own viewpoints. I think that you all have shared perspective that may represent a lot of people, but it doesn't represent everybody.
Right.
But what it does do is it throws it out there and allows people to get more of a feel and an understanding. And I'm trying to do the same thing too. So I don't represent every white person, but I do believe that I can hopefully get a lot of white people to listen and say, oh, wait a minute. And that's the whole point of all of this. Right. Nicole, let's go to you.
Thank you so much. Let's start normalizing these conversations. When I've heard us talk about this again and again, and from what you've said, Joel, the more it happens, the more we flex these muscles, the more we build trust, the more progress is made. And also, let's use our influence where we can and our privilege. So when I think of people watching this show and saying, what next? Use your influence wherever you have it. And that could be in your place of worship, your neighborhood, the boardroom, as a leader in your workplace, or it could be at the dining room table. But when we think of our children and empowering them and giving them a voice and showing them and modeling for them how to act, I think that's where change happens. And we haven't talked a lot about operationalizing systemic anti-racism, operationalizing ways to dismantle racism, as well as how to strategize. And I hope that we could talk about that more, but that's what's really going to affect change, is when we get down to the systemic root and make those decisions. And often we can do that in our places of work.
Very nice. Chandra, we'll go to you because, we got to let the cleanup man go last. But
That's right.
That's right. Chandra?
So I echo what Cole and Cass are saying. I believe that it's important that we celebrate the progress that we've made, that we celebrate the fact that it can be 4 people of color on a podcast with you when we would not have had that opportunity years ago. So I think it's important to celebrate the progress that we made. I also think it's important that we all take the time to really identify the part that we play. Sometimes it's us that we have to plant the seed, and we cannot take it personal if people don't want to take the time to water it. I think it's so important to understand it. So perceptions are coming into play, assumptions are coming into play. It really is all about people's lived experiences. But when you are an agent of change, sometimes you have to be the disruptor and you have to keep it moving. So I think it's important to celebrate what is to come, decide the role that you are supposed to play. And if you know you are called to be a disruptor, do it and move forward.
Chandra, thank you. André, last word.
Yeah, I love all the actionable items because I want people to be able to take away things. So what Nicole talked about is the anti-racism. When you know you're activating your anti-racism side of things is when you're in a meeting and someone says something derogatory and you speak out and go, that's not right. You can't say that. You're at a Target and someone's being criticized because they don't speak their language. You're not speaking our foreign soils language, whatever that is, right? And so you're speaking out against that. That's when you know you're doing things. But if you're not willing to do that, you can say all day, I'm not for racism, but your silence is compliant. You're compliant by your silence. So if you walk right by that and say nothing, then you are guilty, right? And so that's the other step. The other step is the anti-racism side. How do you see something, whether in a board meeting, a leadership meeting, someone in your culture of your environment that's being criticized about whatever that might be derogatory? Do you say anything or do you walk by that? Do you remain quiet? And keep in mind, you don't have to be aggressive, take off your jacket, roll up your sleeves, and do a Mike Tyson stance. That ain't what we're talking about. There is power in being calm and having a really constructive conversation. Like, that's just not, you can't say that. And so when we start to do that, if we were doing this as a country, a lot of the things we see happening in our cities would not be happening, or they wouldn't be happening at the level that they're happening. So that would be the takeaway I would want people to have. And again, I would venture to say that Joel probably hasn't had the consistency of guests, repeated guests like what he's had with this group. So we know his intentions are well, that he has intentionality about what he's doing. He's not doing it to get, YouTube likes and all that. I know him because he really wants to make an impact. And the reason this show happened is because after George Floyd, he reached out to me and said, what can I do? And if we had more people doing that, what would this world look like, right? It's a humanitarian challenge right now. And we have to figure out in this country what we want to become. And if what we want to become is what we're seeing, it's going to be really, really disheartening if this is what this country is, although I don't think this is what this country is at its core.
I'm going to say this because I want to simplify everything only because I think this is a really easy way to do it. Ask the question why. You mentioned that word at the top of the podcast, André. Ask yourself why anytime you hear this, even if it's something bad from the other side too, right? Well, I don't think Black lives matter. All lives matter. Why do you think that?
Yeah.
And start the conversation with why,
Mhm.
because it's so easy to get upset by such an ignorant comment like that, right?
Right.
We didn't have white privilege growing up. We had no money. Well, why are you saying that? Why? And
Great point.
and then that's a way to open that discussion.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Hey, that guest you had today was really well spoken. That guest you had today was really well articulated. And I see Cass smiling there, and it's not a happy smile either, right? I mean, that's one of the worst. Well, why do you say they're well spoken?
Yeah.
Is there a better way to say that, or did you just think, boy, you know? And then it opens up the ability to have that conversation. I mean, it's one word.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't need to be, you shouldn't be doing this. Yes, we'd all like to be able to say that, but just the simple question of why, and that can open it up going both ways. That's just kind of where things went with me. So anyway, I'm grateful to all of you for, I think, what will be growing friendships for sure, but really at this point to one, dedicating the time to do this, which includes us usually having a conversation privately, all of us in advance. So I know it's a time commitment. It's a longer podcast than a lot of the other ones I do. But I just want to thank you all for trusting me too. And I really, this is not about me. And I know you guys say great things, but I'm grateful that you all have trusted me and given me this platform to do this. So to Nicole, Jacob, Silvey, André Davis, Chandra Clark, Cass Butler, Chandra, good luck, but we're not getting rid of you.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much for doing this. Hang tight for a second unless you have to go, and I totally understand that too, because we've gone long. But I appreciate all of you. So grateful again, and we'll continue this discussion one form or another. And I encourage everyone that's watching too, and I know that you will all do this, to share with your networks. The more people that hear it, the more people that see it, the more they can ask those same questions of why. So thank you guys. Have a great week.
Thank you.
Okay, so that is going to do it for another episode of Rounding the Bases Live, presented by Enterprise Bank and Trust. # no stopping you. Again, a quick reminder, if you're interested in donating to Big Brothers Big Sisters, I've got my campaign going right now for Most Wanted. You can text JGold to 44321. Real simple. And $10, $25, $50, whatever you want to do, it all goes to an amazing cause. Talk about those kids and supporting those kids right here locally. Really, really important. Huge thanks to Kansas City Audio Visual for helping out with the studio here. If you've got audio visual needs, check them out, kcav.com. Happy to make that connection for you. And again, I just want to say to Enterprise Bank and Trust, along the way, very early on, when I started having these conversations and others like it, and the podcast goes in many different directions, they said, we love that you're doing this. Keep doing this. And quite frankly, I would have done it one way or another, but to have that support from the company whose name is right over my shoulder really makes me feel good about knowing that I've got that kind of support from a sponsor that is helping me do the show on an everyday basis. Again, I hope you'll share this all with your networks. Really important stuff, just to continue to have these discussions, to continue to ask why. So that's going to do it for another episode of Rounding the Bases, presented by Enterprise Bank and Trust. My name is Joel Goldberg. Some updates in the next day or two on scheduling and some changes that are going to be made, but this podcast is not going away. So I look forward to seeing you again tomorrow, and thanks for watching.